Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven.
Bernadette and family and extended family, feel no guilt in laughter. He'd know how much you care. Feel no sorrow in a smile that he's not here to share. You cannot grieve forever. He would not want you to. He'd hope that you'd carry on the way you always do. So talk about the good times and the way you showed you cared. The days you spent together, all the happiness you shared. Let memories surround you. A word someone may say will suddenly recapture a time, an hour, a day that brings him back as clearly as though he were still here and fills you with the feeling that he's always near. For if you keep those moments, you will never be apart, and he will live forever locked in your heart. Good afternoon, church. We have the tributes, the first one being a presentation by the Institute of Architects, presented by Mr. Steve Brown.
Good afternoon. The Institute of Architects expresses sincerest condolences to Bernadette and the entire family and friendship fold of Lowell Jarvis. Lowell Jarvis made a sterling contribution to the profession of architecture in Antigua and Barbuda and the CARIFORUM region. He was a past president and also served as director and secretary of the Antigua and Barbuda Institute of Architects. As a full member, he made meaningful input to the ACSAC, the Association of Commonwealth Societies of Architects in the Caribbean, the FCAA, the Federation of Caribbean Associations of Architects, and the CSA, the Caribbean School of Architecture. Up to the time of his passing, he represented the Institute and the public on the Architects Registration Board. Lowell worked diligently to bring about the long overdue updating of the Architects Registration Act and the proposed Caribbean Architects Registration Exam, CARE, among several other things. Lowell was never selfish, and he willingly shared his knowledge with others, be it students, intern architects, or colleagues. His unwavering support for and encouragement given to his colleagues was much appreciated, but it is his sincere friendship that will be most missed. His passing has left a void, and he will be greatly missed. I'll now add a tribute of my own. I met Lowell over 45 years ago while we were students at the Antigua Grammar School. We have been friends since then. In recent time, we have become colleagues, and our friendship grew even deeper. I decided to do this tribute in a true grammarian fashion. Quidem vitae viles homines, ali quoque est significativum est. factum est. Ubi tangitur imprimitis vitae genus. Amici, colleghi, imo orbis terrae nascentium, beate sumus cognovici, Deo gratias, quia quod. The translation: some men live insignificant lives, others make meaningful contributions, and having done so, leave a mark where they have touched the lives of family, friends, colleagues, the country of their birth, and indeed the world. We are all blessed to have known them, and for that we give God thanks. Just as he was, we should always endeavor to be. Semper Virens.
We now have a tribute from the Villa Primary School. we say thanks to the Villa Primary School. We now call on the Board of Education to present their tribute.
Okay. On behalf of the Board of Education, our Chairman, Heather G. Mannix, and all the directors, management and staff, the staff of the site office, his fellow consultants, including Gordon Allen, our quantity surveyor in England, and Joseph Lieber of Carry Trade, one of our principal vendors, I wish to convey sincere condolences to the family of the late Lowell Jarvis, his wife and children, and extended family members, since at the time of his death, he served as a project manager of the National Public Library construction project. By the time I got to know him, Lowell was a relatively small man in size. But his vision of the library was large, as is demonstrated by the sheer size, complexity, and majesty of the structure he conceived and designed. Still, his vision for the library was even greater, as he anticipated that it would serve not only as a place of reference and research, but a touchstone for education in Antigua and Barbuda, an index by which our intellectual development in time would be measured. Lowell admired my writing, and I admired his calypso consciousness. As two proud patriots, he and I enjoyed several discussions about Antigua and Barbuda's cultural traditions, folkways, and values that had passed with seemingly little record having been made or kept of them. And I know that he hoped our National Library would become the repository where they would find a resting place, there to be reviewed and from there reborn as generations to come discover who we had been and indeed who we could become again. To say that Lowell had a passion for completing the National Library would be an understatement. And as the physical structure inched its way to near completion, his fire was restoked by the ways in which he could continue to contribute to the process of outfitting the building and getting it ready for its grand opening and its becoming operational. We had already discussed his new title and position as consultant, so he could advise the ministry, holding its hand, so to speak, on the way forward. And as a matter of fact, even from his hospital bed, Lowell was texting me to set up an appointment for the day after he expected to be discharged, at which time we were to go over his duties and the new expected outcomes. It is my everlasting regret, and the regret of my colleagues, that Lowell did not live to see the day of the opening of which he dreamed, spoke, and salivated, that he will not be sitting in the front row and feel the pride of accomplishment at the moment the official ribbon is cut and the library is declared open. The Minister of Education has already announced that a section of the library will be named in Lowell's honor, and the Board of Education concurs that the recognition is fitting and highly deserved. Accordingly, we stand ready, with pen in hand, waiting to sign the check that will bring the naming ceremony into being, because we strongly believe in naming and honoring our heroes in whatever sphere they may serve. The Board of Education is also prepared to endow every 5 years the Lowell Jarvis Architectural Studies Scholarship in recognition of the fact that native-born Antiguans and Barbudans can not only dream great dreams, but off of paper and out of steel, stone, and wood, bring them into being. In these ways, the scholarship and the naming of the wing, although he is gone, Lowell Jarvis will not be forgotten. May his soul rest in peace, and may his spirit guide his beloved library to the finish line. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Isaac. We now have a tribute from the T.N. Kernan School, where Mrs. Jarvis was a principal for many years. T.N. Kernan?
Prepare us a dwelling place there.
now have tribute from Francisco Jude.
Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. The tribute that I'm about to do is from the Gambers Youth Progressive Club and myself. He is part of the club. It's a long story, but it's not my tribute. It's his tribute, so I can't go through all these things. But I'll tell you one thing. When we had the club, we used to have a guy who comes. Every time you have things on Saturday night, he comes and he eat. So as soon as he eat, he gone. So this night I planned for him. So when he come this night, now I said to Juggler, which is Lee, we're going to catch him tonight. So Juggler said, oh, okay, I'll tell you. So what I did, I put some names in the box, but he didn't know that all his name was in the box. So anything you're going to pull out is going to be his name. And we still have it as a joke now when Lee come home, and so we still say, well, you know, but I was a brother in the club. It all started in my yard. So a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin sick soul. Sometime I feel discouraged and think my work's in vain, but then the Holy Spirit revives my soul again. There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin sick soul.
The ACLM and the LTHMC will now pay tribute, being presented by Dr. James Knight.
Good afternoon. From the ACLM and the Leonard Tim Hector Memorial Committee. Lowell Jarvis, a generous soul and a wonderful human being. Death is not real when the work of life has been well fulfilled. For some time now, we in the Leonard Tim Hector Memorial Committee have been grappling with this most profound statement by the great Cuban liberator, poet, writer, and thinker, Jose Marti. Its seeming contradiction presents what might be regarded as its complexity of thought, and yet, on examination, the meaning comes full-blown. When your work of life has been well fulfilled, death really is not the end, and perhaps we can venture to say death is vanquished. Vanquished by the ideals for which you strive, by the deeds you perform, by battling against injustice and oppression, against the abuse and exploitation of the weak by the powerful, regardless of race, color, class identity, or country on the stage of life. You live on in a very real way after physical death. A more apt quote, therefore, could not be found to encapsulate our dear brothers and comrades' meaningful and committed life. He genuinely believed and practiced to the fullest what once more the indomitable freedom fighter Jose Marti had to say. It is a man's duty to uplift his fellow man. We are guilty of every human degradation that we do not strive to remedy. Our comrade and brother Lowell Jarvis lived by this and used every nerve and sinew towards that endeavor. Long before the Antigua Caribbean Liberation Movement, ACLM, had as its mantra, "One must study," Jarvis recognized that knowledge is power. With that, he assiduously set about to equip himself at school, at university, and beyond, so that he himself would acquire the tools for his own development, and equally important, for him to uplift his fellow men. Lowell studied in Barbados and Jamaica at the University of the West Indies, UWI. He was not only a serious student academically, but was involved in all aspects of student life, leaving his mark, among other things, as a social activist and a keen sportsman. His love for football, in particular, is well known. After UWI, Brother Jarvis would return home and enter the teaching profession, working in Jennings and in Green Bay. As a young educator, and in the footsteps of his mentor, Leonard Tim Hector, he would bring a fresh and inspiring approach to teaching, constantly provoking and stimulating the minds of his students. To this day, many whom he taught and with whom he came in contact, if only briefly, attest to his tremendous influence on their forging of a new and positive path. To Cuba, Lowell would travel to continue his formal education on an ACLM scholarship, there to study architecture. Cuba would help to shape his life in an even more significant manner and to reinforce his perspective on life. His exposure to the vibrancy of Cuba in language, in music, in dance, in politics, to the Cuban culture in general, contributed to the development of that person constantly struggling to create that new society in Antigua and Barbuda and regionally. Already a key member of the ACLM, Lowell's opinion and advice was sought after on a regular and systematic basis while he studied in Cuba. As one of the ACLM's representatives in Cuba, He gained the respect not only of the regional and international students, but that of Cuban authorities and those of other countries as well. This he won with the calm demeanor, foresight, and praxis. On completion of his studies in architecture, Jarvis returned home and immediately plunged himself into his professional work as an architect, and that as a leading member of the ACLM, determined to bring about fundamental and transformative change in the socioeconomic and political life of Antigua and Barbuda. Javis clearly did not accept the dictum that the poor we will always have with us. He therefore devoted his life to the effort to reorganize society so that poverty, ignorance, and dependency could be eradicated and a new order could be ushered in. In this pursuit, and in his pursuit of that ideal, he would forever be assisting professionally numerous persons of the downtrodden and needy with advice, with doing evaluations, with architectural designs, and would even provide material assistance from the little which he himself had. Such was the generosity of spirit and the sensitivity of Lowell Jarvis. He saw it as his obligation and responsibility to do everything in his power to use his knowledge, his expertise to uplift the fellow man. Countless persons will proclaim how helpful he was in translating documents, especially among members of the Hispanic community who he helped with immigration matters, etc., at absolutely no cost, because that was not the purpose of his assistance. And it was, as it was with individuals, so did he give of his time, energy, and expertise to numerous organizations. His love for football, both as one who played at different levels and as administrator, brought him to the 5 Ps Club. And what devotion, commitment, discipline, and love he displayed for his young charges. He would function as manager, coach, parent, and disciplinarian. He was insistent on discipline and how that would make them better footballers, students, and persons in general. We venture to speak for the 5 Ps group in saying, we know he will be sorely missed. As an architect, Jarvis was as professional as could be, both in his own practice and as an officer of the Architects Association. He was never about cutting corners. He was never ever about giving an appraisal that professionally he felt he could not defend. And this applied to friend or foe alike. He was never one to go around spouting about principle, but he personified it in a real way. Apart from the various interests, Jarvis's life was truly the struggle. He genuinely believed that famous line, where there is no struggle, there is no progress. His entire soul, his entire adult life was with the ACLM and the Leonard Tim Hector Memorial Committee. In these two organizations, he served in every capacity conceivable. As electoral candidate in 1989 in City East, as lifeblood for the Outlet newspaper, as writer, as proofreader, and advisor. Particularly after Tim's death, Outlet would not have been possible without him. Perhaps, therefore, we should use this opportunity to publicly state that Outlet's demise had absolutely nothing to do with the passing of Tim, but rather with the commercial bank concerned. Notwithstanding all the efforts of Brother Jarvis and others to make arrangements for its continuation, the bank did what it did for its own reasons, whether political or otherwise. We are not sure, we are still in the dark. Hopefully, they are still in the sunshine. When the unstinting devotion of Jarvis and others, with the unstinting devotion of Jarvis and others, the outlet newspaper continued for over 2 years after Tim's passing. Javis was indeed the face of ACLM in so many matters, but there is need to mention, if only briefly, one, the question of electoral reform in Antigua and Barbuda and his involvement in that. The issue was constantly being raised by the ACLM and the outlet newspaper. Jarvis would become the voice of that issue within the ACLM, convinced that without proper electoral reforms, guaranteeing the right of a free and fair election, democracy as we've understood it would be seriously threatened and under siege. Brother Jarvis researched, studied, and wrote voluminously on the subject. And this finally resulted in a major submission of ACLM on the electoral reform to the government of the day in the 1990s. Far from all work and no play, Jarvis had a profound appreciation for what is loosely referred to as culture. He had a deep love for the arts in all forms: music, dance, cinematography, painting, etc. He was adamant about the humanizing aspect of these cultural pursuits and the extent to which our people's dignity, confidence, and respect would be enhanced by them. He therefore engaged whenever possible and enjoyed himself fully as an ACLM person. In spite of this heart-rending void created by the passing of El Compañero Javis, he would not want us for a moment to tarry or to despair. He would expect us, difficult as it may be, to redouble our efforts and carry on in his footsteps. He would demand of us that we hold aloft the banner and march constantly forward. To his entire family, and in particular to our sister Bernadette, to Anik, and to Taslim, we share your loss and express our profound condolence. And in the words of the great Guyanese poet laureate Martin Carter, in the death of a comrade, we say, "Dear comrade, it must be you speak no more with us, nor smile no more with us, nor march no more with us. Then let us take a patience and a calm. Forever now the greener leaf explode, sun brightens stone, and all the river burns. Now from the morning vanguard moving on, dear comrade, we salute you and we say, death will not find us thinking that we die." Late in March 2012, that is just under 2 years ago, I shed a tear late one night as I prepared a referral note for Brother Jarvis to take to the Mount St. John's Medical Center the following morning. I, James, called upon the other J's, Sister Jennifer Hector, Jerome Blah, Lawrence Jardine, and you may say Judy Goodwin, and told them what were my suspicions. And they hoped that I was wrong. The following evening, as I stood next to Brother Jarvis in the observation department of the Mount St. John's Medical Center, before the surgeon had delivered to him the bad news, we spoke of another time when I stood next to him in hospital. That was about this time, or a little later, in the year 1987. I was in my 4th year, as a medical student in Havana. And Jarvis made a complaint to me, and I confirmed that he was suffering from a hernia. My rotations through the various specialties in medicine had brought me to surgery. And I spoke with the leaders of the surgical team, and we decided to make an arrangement whereby Jarvis would come in the evening as though it were an emergency, and so they would arrange to do the surgery urgently. He came, and the surgery was arranged. Late that night, in the operation room, I can remember quite clearly there was soft, delightful music playing. And I was humming. The surgeons were humming sometimes too. And Jarvis was tapping both sides of the operating table because he had been given a spinal block, so he was still awake. The surgeons even commented that we Caribeños loved music so much that we enjoyed it under any circumstances. I left the hospital late that night, took a bus, and I stopped off in the heart of the city by a large ice cream parlor, which was a major hangout, especially for young people, a few blocks away from where I live. It was the only place where I would have got something to eat at that hour. I was extremely hungry and tired. As I leaned over the counter to place my order, the bag which I was carrying with all the belongings that Javis had brought with him to the hospital was snatched. The place was so crowded I didn't even see in which direction the bag went. I quickly turned to a police officer, but it was no help. We could do nothing. I couldn't sleep that night. I did not know what to tell Jarvis. It absolutely pained me. And what helped me was Jarvis's usual calm. His major concern, or his immediate concern, was that in the bag was a book on architecture, which was not his. He had borrowed it from a student from Ghana, and he really would have liked to return it. But what was most significant among the items lost in that bag was Jarvis's spectacles. Because Jarvis, who we know could hardly see his hands in front of him without his glasses, was in the middle of preparing his thesis, his final paper for his architectural degree. The project was a modern national library for Antigua and Barbuda. That was 1987. Jarvis had put his personal imagination and tremendous effort into what was essentially an ACLM vision. It is no wonder then that Jarvis was more than delighted to be called upon to be the education officer of the United People's Party. He was a man for enlightenment. And that is why it pained him so much when his efforts to organize informed discussions in that party seemed to be deliberately frustrated. In July of 2000, Javis wrote a letter of resignation in which he lamented that the executive meetings had degenerated into nothing more than senseless Wednesday night rituals, and nothing of regional or international significance was being discussed. He said that he said afterwards many times his concern was that failing to educate a political party was running the risk of cultivating a sanctuary for hustlers, imposters, bluffers, and maybe even common thieves. And no one could pay him to be around for that. He shuddered to think that there might be a further waste of humanity over which some might preside and bluff. And he did not want to be in that. And it pained him so much for years to come, probably more than it pained any others of us, that it was just last December 31st at our traditional annual Old Year's Night meeting at the Hector residence in Potters that he brought copies of that resignation letter and distributed them to all the members. That is how much that meant to him, and he did not want to go and have that forgotten. The fundamental questions remain for him. What type of society are we preparing for upcoming generations? And for what type of society are we preparing them? How are we going about it? Now he lies there lifeless, victim of the fact that nature is neither perfect nor just. For what other reason could there be? Now, he was not vindictive. He was not adapting, warping himself into all sorts of unprincipled positions towards to haul in public money. He was not trying devious schemes to undermine the democratic process. He was not doing anything of that sort. How many can claim that as a result of their deeds, they deserve to be around in this world any longer than he was? Our Cuban and other Hispanic friends have been saying to me in recent days, "Qué lástima que los buenos no duran." And it is indeed a great pity that the good should die young. In my discussions with the various friends and colleagues throughout the region, the same sentiments are repeated. Our own Frankie Michael, who was a classmate of his in Antigua Grammar School, says from Barbados, "We have lost a very principled man." That sentiment is repeated everywhere, from Jamaica right down to Suriname. A good example would be a text message I got from Dr. Sonia Copeland in Jamaica last night. "Please make mention that Jarvis's friends, colleagues, and those from his university fraternity all across the Caribbean send their condolences to his family, friends, and colleagues. He was a gentleman and epitomized the words chivalry and civility. His soul will rest in peace." And all agree that if Javis had the chance to live his life all over again, as our Jamaican friends would say, he would do it same way. And a very strong and equally loving wife and the rest of his family would be right beside him. And we, his comrades, would be here to support him as we support each other, saying, "He ain't heavy. He's our brother." And on we go. I thank you.